Now, England's men will take to the field in the Champions Trophy tomorrow to face Afghanistan, following months of debate and controversy. It's a match that's been scrutinised by politicians and leading figures around the world, with many calling for a boycott due to the erosion of rights and women and girls in Afghanistan by the Taliban. For more on this, I'm joined by Shabam Jain from the Centre of Sport and Human Rights. He's also a doctoral researcher at the University of Cambridge. Good to see you, Shabam. It's quite a difficult subject, isn't it, really? But the bottom line is, tomorrow, England's men will play Afghanistan on the world stage. And to put it bluntly, it's not an opportunity that's afforded to Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think it's important to understand that there has been a lot of discussion around the fact that this might amount to gender apartheid, that this might relate to human rights violations. It's important to understand what apartheid means. It's about the intent to subjugate, the ideology of domination, and the institutional nature of discrimination of people based on a certain identity, gender identity in this case, which is the essential erasure of women from public life in Afghanistan since the Taliban takeover. And that is what people have been referring to as gender apartheid, for instance. And essentially, for that reason, the women have not been afforded the opportunity to play. And several human rights bodies have been talking about it. The UN Human Rights Rapporteur for Afghanistan has been talking about it, and Afghan women have been talking about it, and all are calling for this situation to change in sports and otherwise. And that's where we are currently.
Yeah, so you talk about that, this gender apartheid. So you're basically saying that it's not just they can't play sport. It's actually on a wider social spectrum, isn't it? So explain more about that.
Right, of course. So the idea being that there is a complete erasure of women from public life because they are banned from participating in any aspect of public life, to come out on the streets, to play, to participate in any other cultural activity, or just even to show their face or to even voice out their opinions. Everything is completely off the table in Afghanistan currently. And that is what activists have been reporting about, UN bodies have been talking about it, and it's an issue that is much wider than sport. But then sport is one vehicle where we can highlight these issues, which is why this becomes important.
OK, look, stay there, Shabam, because we've mentioned calls for a boycott, and Afghanistan's women's cricketers have explicitly said they don't support that line of action. Let's hear from Firooza Amiri. She's been speaking to Sky Sports News' Amma Mehta.
We have been sacrificed a lot. We have lost everything back home just to play cricket, and we came to a new country. We start over everything again to just play cricket and represent our country. So I think it's time for ICC to recognize us as a team and take an action.
And what action would you like the ICC to take? As far as I've seen it, they've started a working group, but that working group is a group of men who haven't spoken to anyone helping you guys and supporting you guys in Australia and other places around the world? Since
we arrived in Australia, we never get any support from ICC. As I said earlier, we've been leaving everything behind and coming to a new country, just play cricket. And we were thinking that when we go to Australia, we're going to have lots of support from ICC. But it was wrong. We never had, we didn't receive any email from ICC to ask us, are you safe? Are you okay? You've been going to another country. Do you need anything or something like that? We never get that support from ICC. But I think at the moment, now, the situation that Afghan women are facing in Afghanistan, it's time to ICC to take an action and recognize us as a team, as a national team, and let us compete in the world stage, or recognize as a refugee team. Then we can represent Afghanistan, we can play for Afghanistan, and we can, as I said, we can compete in the international matches as well. It's been very hard. Starting over everything again, it's been very challenging, and still it's very challenging for all of us because we came to a country where it's completely different. It's with different culture, with different life, and we, as I said, when we lost everything and came to a new country, we had been facing so much of mental problems and emotional problem as well, because it's been very hard to accept that you lost everything. that you have built it over like 17 or 18 years. It's good to see world want to support us and support Afghan women. But I personally think boycott it doesn't have any impact. Until we get that right, we will keep continue pushing and dreaming.
Yeah, so look, criticism of the ICC there, who have formed a working group to help resolve the issue and are committed to do so. We also know that they are helping to fund development programmes in Afghanistan. We did actually approach the ICC ahead of this interview, who declined to send a representative. But Shabam, if boycotting isn't the answer, and clearly that it's past that when it comes to this tournament, what other lines of direct action can be taken?
Right, and I think this is the crux of the issue essentially, and maybe we think about the issue more comprehensively through something which I call as the voice framework. V for visibility, O for opportunity, I for inclusion, C for care, and E for engagement. So let me elaborate on that. So when I say visibility, I mean that this issue needs to be front and center all the time, that we need to keep talking about it, and every opportunity we get, we need to give the space to talk about this issue, give the space to the women of Afghanistan. You know, what is the antidote to erasure? The antidote to erasure is visibility, right? So that is visibility. Then if I talk about opportunity, opportunity comes from funding, from support, right? So we know that the ICC funds the Afghanistan Cricket Board as a part of its full member program. And if the Afghanistan Cricket Board is unable to take care of the women's program in the country, then maybe one of the ways to take care or to get around the issue is to send a part of that funding to the Afghan players who are in Australia and in other places currently, and along with that funding, other ways of supporting that team. And also think about not just this team currently, these players who are in exile in Australia, but what they represent. They represent all of Afghanistan, all of Afghan women, and the widespread Afghan diaspora across the world. So it's not just about these women, but also how we ensure that we can keep talking about this and make sure that we have a sustained Afghan cricket movement if the situation in the country does not improve, unfortunately. So maybe think about how we tap into that diaspora for future grassroots and pathways development. So that's opportunity. If we talk about inclusion, I think that's essentially the idea of recognition of these current players who were employed by the Afghan Cricket Board at the time they were forced to evacuate, to recognize them as representatives of the Afghan nation state, which is their demand. If, for instance, that is not possible, then another way to do it perhaps would be to recognize them as a refugee team, which is again where cricket can take a stance, find some creative solutions to do that, and that has been the demand of the players as well.
Yeah.
And then if I come to care in that framework, that's essentially the idea of caring through governance and accountability. Again, if I come back to the Afghan Cricket Board, their mandate is to take care of both the women's game and the men's game. If, for whatever reason, maybe due to no fault of their own, they are unable to take care of the women's game, then maybe some other entity needs to be given the responsibility and the accountability of taking care of the women's game, right? And as the players in their own letter to the ICC have stated, maybe the East Asian Cricket Office, which is based in Australia, can take care of this. So somebody like that needs to be given that mandate to understand and take care of the women's game on behalf of the Afghan people, to do it carefully, to do it sensitively with all the accountability. And in the end, if we come to engagement as part of that framework, that is again the crux of it, which is that you need to engage the women, the players who are being most affected, right? And as we heard earlier, the ICC has set up an all-male working group. The Afghan women players who are in exile are not part of this. They have not been communicated to the best of my knowledge. They need to have a seat at the table. They need to have their voices heard to tell this working group what they can do to change their lives, to make sure that what they do is for their benefit. So essentially, if we make sure that they are given the visibility, that they are given the opportunity, inclusion is ensured, through care and through engagement, we can perhaps start thinking about ways in which we can actually help the women.
Sounds good to me. So voice, that's your acronym for it. Look, we know that the power is pretty concentrated, isn't it, in several nations, prominent nations. Do you feel they're doing enough in this situation then?
Absolutely. There is a lot of things that other cricketing nations are doing and can do more. So one is the idea around funding. They can fund and provide funding to the cricket players in exile. ECB, for instance, recently donated something to the campaign, the crowdfunding campaign that the Afghan players have started, which is a great initiative. More and more boards should do that, for instance. Other is support in any way possible, monetary support and other support, organize matches with them. Cricket Australia is helping the players with sort of being hosted in Australia. There's a match that happened recently. Cricket Australia had a huge part in that. So more and more support like that would be welcome. And also, I think, accountability, right? To demand the ICC to take care of the matter, to demand the other sports bodies and other stakeholders to make sure that some progress can be made on that. ECB has sent a letter to ICC recently. We have heard that Cricket South Africa and Cricket Australia have also been voicing. So more and more boards, if they do these things, that can go a long way in helping the women.
OK, so they are coming on board. Look, Richard Gould is the chief executive of the ECB, and he spoke to Sky Sports News earlier this month. Have a listen to this.
We have been consulting widely, both with representatives of from Afghanistan, from government, and we've put in train a number of our own initiatives to try and help with Afghan refugees and female cricketers, working also with Cricket Australia in some of the things that we've been doing. But we also need to make sure that the ICC, the International Cricket Council, which is the representative body for all global cricket, takes action also, because we need to make sure that as a sport, as a global sport, that we are sending the appropriate messages, not necessarily to the Taliban, because I don't think they'll be listening, but to the people of Afghanistan, and showing them that we can see them, we can hear them, and we want to help them.
Would a boycott of the game not have a bigger impact, though?
No, I don't think so. No, I think that would be counterproductive. I think if you end up boycotting a game, the Taliban won't care. Half the Taliban don't want cricket at all being played in Afghanistan, so that doesn't help the Afghani people.
Well, look, the ICC obviously only runs events for members countries, doesn't it? So, which differs from the IOC in terms of this refugee team you do get in the Olympics. Well, you mentioned that earlier on. Is that something that you would support, having a refugee team?
Absolutely. If it is deemed that the current players who are in exile in Australia cannot be recognized as the Afghan women's national team, then maybe the alternative is to recognize them as a refugee team. And that is, again, something that the players themselves have demanded in their letter to the ICC. So absolutely, if that is the best way for the players to play, essentially, you know, players just want to play. They want to showcase their talent, their hard work, and what they have been fighting for. So if that is the way to get them to play, then go ahead with that.
OK, and there was a match recently, wasn't there, in Melbourne, I think it was, involving an Afghanistan women's 11. What was the significance of that? And, you know, what sort of message did that send?
Right, of course. So this match was definitely a big milestone. Late in January, for the first time, these women came together and were able to play a match. It gave them a platform to showcase their talent, their hard work. There were a lot of stories that came out before the match, during, after, which was really heartwarming in one ways, but also heartbreaking in other ways. To see that match also gave them the platform to launch their crowdfunding campaign, Picture Future, which they launched that day. The MCC based at Lords has donated to that campaign. ECB has donated to that campaign, if I understand. So that was a great initiative. What this match also showed is that, you know, these things can happen. We can perhaps take one illustration from football, where the part of Afghan women's football team who were also evacuated, they have come on board to form a football team as part of the league structure in Australia, and they have in fact been promoted as well, playing in that league. So maybe something similar could happen in cricket as well, if till whatever instance we cannot have a full recognition. And in the end, I think it's all about giving this voice. So essentially, this gave them the place where they play to the place where they can say, and that's all it is about, I think.
Well, hopefully tomorrow's match will do exactly that and keep the discussion going. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Really good to get your thoughts.